Hello, and welcome to our first webinar on demand brought to you by the Just Breathe team. So, let's start and talk about burnout and the stress cycle, and we'll also kind of go over some of the Just Breathe features today. And first, we're going to kind of jump in and talk about COVID pandemic and the reported stress that you guys as OBH reported back in September, late September, when this survey went out. So there were 78 responses total. And you can see here that in this question that asks overall about how much would you estimate the COVID pandemic has negatively affected your emotional and mental well-being, you'll see that a good amount of you, I think it comes out to, let's see, I think it's 73% of you indicated that you have been negatively impacted at least somewhat to extreme. So if you look over here at 5, this is extremely, 1 would be not at all. So that is definitely telling and probably not surprising, but I do think, it's something that's important to understand. Also, you can see here with stress and the specific factors that you guys reported impacted you personally. It's hard to see in this long list, but it definitely seems as if the biggest thing, 57 or 74% of you as respondents described that fear or worry that loved ones might become ill or sick or impacted in some way of their health. That was the biggest and is probably still the biggest impact to your stress and mental health and mental anguish even. I think that also there's a lot of loss as a big theme in terms of loss of just social gatherings and precautions and restrictions, feelings of isolation, feelings of just not being permitted to connect with the people that you normally do face to face, physically, in person. That is a big piece. So as much as we have really, I think, gotten by well with the virtual world, I think we're really very much missing that interaction in real life. So that's a big thing. Also, other losses like, employment, whether that's your spouse or a partner or friends, family members, that's been a very big impact to a lot of families as well. So there's a lot happening here. And then I know at the time of this recording, we just kind of got through the Christmas holiday. And so that's been, I know, likely very challenging in a lot of different ways about what we're mourning, the loss of traditions and creating sort of new ones and figuring out how to navigate all of this. So speaking of that, have there been any positives of maybe some of the pandemic restrictions? We asked you this. You guys said about 75% of you indicated a preference of working from home. So there has been some, I guess, benefits to doing that. There's also there's some indications that saving money has been really, helpful at this time of uncertainty. There's not as much to spend. So there's a lot of things actually that you guys found have been somewhat helpful. This one that you can't see, which is 57%, or maybe it's the 57% here, is kind of being able to have time for maybe things, hobbies, duties around your home that you've been procrastinating, like kind of having nothing else maybe to spend a lot of your time doing. So I think a lot of us are tackling some of those things. And then I just thought it would be helpful to share too, what are the pre-COVID activities or just ways of life that you miss the most? And clearly I think that you and we all are missing interacting with other people in a formal way or an informal way, just being an IRL in real life with people, traveling, attending religious services, just visiting family members without stress, without fear, Certainly physical touch and just face-to-face interactions have been things that we just are really craving and missing quite a bit. And then I think it's important also to remember that there are other things happening in 2020 that have also been very impactful to a lot of our stress. And so you described back in September, at least, the upcoming presidential election. About half of you mentioned that as a stressor. This 85% that's not showing up here is the racial unrest of 2020 that really came to a head this year for a lot of reasons, a lot of police brutality things that made the news. And this was, civil rights sort of movements have been really kind of increasing. And that's 85% of you mentioned that has been certainly something that has impacted your well-being. Um, some people had added, there's other things like separation from a spouse this year, having a politically divided family. That's very, very, I can imagine if that would have been an option for people to put in, that would have probably been something that definitely is specific, more specific than some of the other general ones. So there's certainly things in 2020 that have been a challenge, meme worthy, right? This is the most meme worthy time I think that we've been seeing online. So I wanted to talk to you again. I know I've mentioned this book, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, to you. And the authors here, Doctors Emily and Amelia Nagoski, talk a little bit about their book and specifically Burnout on Brene Brown's podcast, which has been a recommendation. Unlocking Us has been such a great, especially this year, such a great podcast for me anyway, to just unwind, take a minute to really think and reflect on some of the themes that I think are really important to stress and to just management of your mood. So we'll talk a little bit today in this recording about burnout specifically. So let's talk about burnout in biology and then the 7 ways to complete the stress cycle. That's kind of what we'll review today in this recording. Biology and science, you might hear and think, this is not going to be very interesting or it's going to be a little academic. But what I've loved about their book actually is that they really break it down to where it's super easy to digest and understand. And it helped me really think about my stress and how I manage stress in a way that was just very helpful and practical. So that's why I wanted to share it with you. So the stress cycle, if you think about pretty much emotion in general as many little cycles, each emotion is making a cycle, like going around in a circle. That's really the foundation of what they describe in the book. So what is emotion? It's, automatic, instantaneous, and it's a whole body experience. Left to their own devices, emotions will end on their own. So that's really the mentality, the thing that take away here is that emotions are natural, that they're neurochemical and they happen in the brain, and it's in response to some stimulus, right? And different stimuli impact different people. Those of us that have different things that cause emotion or that make our emotional response trigger. So remember, the cycles happen in your whole entire body and they're involuntary. Emotion is not something I think that we have to control or repress, even though a lot of us try to do that as coping, but involuntarily they're part of the natural human experience and they're automatic and they're instantaneous. So if we can recognize what's happening in us, just like we know that our heart beats and our blood flow goes through the body, it's the same idea with emotion. It's just we haven't learned to, I think, accept that in that way. This might be sort of feeling like preaching to the choir because I think we all know as professionals, especially those of us in helping fields and support fields, the components of burnout are certainly probably things that you can identify. Exhaustion, this first one, that happens when you get stuck in an emotion. So if you think about that cycle that I mentioned earlier, it's almost like going through it and just being stuck in there and not finishing it. And so, no wonder helping professions are so exhausting. We are, confronted with people who are in need and understandably in need, but all day, day after day. And, parenting too. Parenting is exhausting. Once you're a parent, you're never not a parent. You're always going through these little cycles of stress. And when you get stuck, that's again when that exhaustion comes. And, sometimes we get stuck because we can't get through that cycle. The most difficult emotions like rage, grief, despair, helplessness, those might be too hard to move through alone. And so that's where it makes sense that we get stuck. So number 2 is depersonalization. This is that depletion of empathy, caring, compassion, the parts of us that we know and that we value and our values, where we feel like we're not feeling connected to them or we're not feeling connected to ourselves even. And so there's that feeling of kind of maybe like, a year think, I just don't feel like myself. That's sort of this piece of burnout of just like not feeling like those values are as important as they normally are. And number 3, of course, a decreased sense of accomplishment, that unconquerable sense of futility, just feeling like nothing you do makes any difference, that just profound helplessness. I mean, it's just feeling like, like you're hitting a wall all the time. So if you're hearing any of these things and thinking, oh, that really resonates, this could be like either you've reached burnout or that you're maybe like kind of coming up on burnout. So emotions are tunnels. This is the big metaphor that comes from the book and the authors. If you go all the way through emotion as if it's a tunnel, you get to the light at the end. That's really the basic. I know it sounds very almost simplistic, but I think if we narrow it down this way, it does help us to realize that stress is one of these. Like it just like any emotion, stress is a tunnel that we have to complete. And sure, like just because you complete one stress tunnel doesn't mean stress goes away. It means that you've gotten through one tunnel and then maybe one comes right after it. So it's all about how you move through it and how you cope. This slide is specifically, it seems also very elementary probably, but I think this is what resonated with me the most when I listened to the podcast and read through the first part of the book. So here it is. Here's the profound moment. Dealing with your stress is a separate process from dealing with the things that cause you stress. Let me just say that one more time. Dealing with your stress is a separate process from dealing with the things that cause your stress. So stressors, right? Those are what activate the stress response, and they can be internal or external. All the things in this little list here, external, work, money, family, time, cultural norms and expectations, experiences of discrimination, anything that's external outside of yourself, or internal, the self-criticism we give ourselves, the worry about body image that we have sometimes, our identity, questioning ourselves, confidence, wondering about our future, who we're going to become in the future. Those stressors are all things that literally may be interpreted by your body as threats, like potential threats. Here's where the biology comes in. So, stress on the other side is the neurological and physiological shift that happens in your body when you encounter one of the stressors or multiple stressors on the other side of the slide here. So stress in and of itself is evolutionarily adaptive response. It happens in your entire body, like we mentioned earlier, when you encounter a threat of some kind. So it helps us cope. It is part of our survival mechanism. So it certainly will help us cope with things like, say, being chased by a lion. And we know about fight, flight, freeze response. But the stress response in that is this cascade of neurological and hormonal activity that initiates physiological changes to help you survive. So your entire mind and body literally change in response to a perceived threat. So just eliminating a stressor does not eliminate the stress. That's the big piece. Your body still has to go through the cycle in some way. So your body is soaked in what they call in their podcast stress juice, waiting for some cue that you're safe, waiting for a cue that the potential threat is gone and that you can relax into celebration and relief. And this happens day after day after day. And that can lead to the chronically increased blood pressure and slew of other health concerns, or even life-threatening illnesses that we know about. So the stress itself, on the right side here, the stress itself will kill you actually faster than the stressors on the other side will, unless you do something about kind of your stress cycle. So that's where we want to kind of look at your stress specifically. So if, over 70% of you have seen and acknowledged that your stress levels have been very much impacted, your mental well-being has been impacted by COVID specifically, then this should resonate. Go back to some of the things that are stressing you. Look, it's almost 3/4 of you said that that biggest stressor that you have right now related to COVID, again, this is back in September, but it's still, I think, relevant. Your fear that a loved one might become ill. And, over half of you are mourning the cancellation of events on a bigger scale, your social lives, which is part of, such an important process in the human experience, especially in our society. So you're also really feeling the anxiety related to the uncertainty about how the pandemic will play out. I mean, here we are now, as of this recording, looking through the vaccine options and getting those out there to the frontline folks and the most at-risk people. So we're really still kind of feeling that uncertainty of what that's going to be like. So, we've lost a lot of our pre-COVID routine. It's despite mentioning, working from home being preferential. But we very much miss those face-to-face interactions with others. And just that loss, I think, at this point is a stressor where you're really worried and the stress cycle is consistently being, and that stress juice is consistently being kind of like all over through the body. So, the noteworthy thing too, again, is that 85% of you, like I mentioned earlier, indicated being impacted by the racial tensions and civil rights movement stuff this year. And that can be like a more profound sense of stress where you feel very helpless constantly. So that's a really, really challenging and really, really challenging year, as we all know. So why do we get stuck? What is that piece of like being stuck in the tunnel or stuck in the cycle that I mentioned earlier, which can cause burnout? Well, so chronic stressors, of course, the things that just don't go away, the pieces of constantly, kind of managing the threats in the environment. So that's when stress outpaces our capacity to process it. So if you think about it, the tunnel, sort of metaphor, you think of like your tunnels being just like stretched out indefinitely and never seeing a light at the end. And so that can be really hard to get out. You never see the light because you're always in a tunnel of some kind. So, when your stress response doesn't change your situation, which, let's say your stress response is like, run, get out of here when you have to give a presentation in front of your peers, or you're taking some sort of like examination and you say, I can't. That's when, we're literally like not able to tackle it. We're not able to kind of move forward. Another big piece that we get stuck because of is social appropriateness. So we have to smile and be nice sometimes. We are in a society with norms. So, even when our stress response is telling us the thing that you want to do is like, maybe like tell off your coworker who's bothering you, like you can't. He's your coworker, and like he may be being annoying, but you can't necessarily just like react the way that your internal response is asking you to. And finally, safety. This is a big one, especially with some of the more macro level things. Many times it's safer not to react and not to engage in the thing that your stress response is telling you to do, and hold on to it until a later time. So then you're sort of bottling it, right? Because it would be safe, it would be unsafe not to. So that's definitely things of just understanding why you get stuck might be important. Is it just this chronic sense of one thing after another? Is it about wanting to maintain social norms? Is it more about safety? Like I would be in danger if I did react. To think about what it is that kind of gets in your way in terms of the stuckness with stress. So here's the meat of the practical part of this. And I'm sure some of these things are very familiar to you. They should be. We know all about stress management from a lot of different points of view. But the Nagoskis talk in their book about these 7 specific things. And so physical activity is the most efficient. And I think we hear this so many times, but it takes some magical amount of time, at least for me, to have understood, like, wow, this is really a big one for me. Like, I need to make this a priority. And it doesn't have to be like any formal, special way of doing physical activity. You don't have to go to a gym. You don't have to be in a class or doing a formal workout. You can literally just move. Like it really is as simple as walking, moving, cleaning, dancing, being silly, like just move. Just move. Also, there's the progressive muscle relaxation that we all kind of probably know about, where you focus on certain muscles in the body and like clench and release. That's part of physical movement, and that can be simple. Like you're sitting at your desk or on the couch, and you can do that without much work or effort at all. Number 2 is breathing and breath work. This is one of those physiological things. Breathing, and specific, like intentional breathing, down regulates the nervous system, the central nervous system. So it's good for when you don't have enough time, when you need to just like have a moment to like calm. It's highly evidence-based approach for completing the stress response cycle. So we know this too. There's really no work or effort involved. It's just how your biology works. It's interesting. Breathing is one of those, I think it's the only thing that I can think of that's both involuntary and voluntary. Like it's something in your body that you can actually take command of and literally like ease out the rest of the body. So that's it. That's a great one. Number 3, it's hard right now, but it's positive social interaction. And that's anybody. Literally, it can be someone that you appropriately masked and you're ordering something, a coffee, and you just say hi or you send a very basic compliment or ask them how they're doing. I mean, it can be momentary. Of course, the better kind, I think, is like to do this with, a loved one and just really connect. So that's also very helpful for stress. And I think it's important to think, like, how do I need to manage stress? Maybe let me just call my friend really quick or have a Zoom call, like just to catch up. There's something about that right now. I think that we feel like, oh, do I want to go to the effort to do it? But I know at each time we do it and like we're in it, it feels so much better. It is good for the biology of stress. Number 4 is a little bit related. It's laughter. It can't be fake though. It needs to be like that full belly laughter that I know we all have had experienced before. And if you feel like you can't access that in the moment, which I can understand, it's actually helpful biologically to just reminisce with someone about a time that you laughed that way. So a memory of, do you remember that time that was the most silly thing where we just like couldn't stop laughing and we were like crying? Like just calling upon the memory of it actually can be very helpful. Number 5 is affection. This also feels related to the last 2, and it's just it's again this biological thing where we feel safer and we feel less stressed or less threatened when we have another human that we can feel safe with. So this means physical affection, and again this is a hard time to find people who are not, maybe in your pod of people in your household where you can do this with, but just like a warm hug in a safe and trusting context. They even talk about a 20-second hug, which sounds a little long in terms of, again, social norms and awkwardness, but that is like the amount of time that they found that the social bonding hormone oxytocin gets released. So that is like just holding on to someone, of course, someone you feel safe and who you care about and who you trust, and you can maybe feel awkward a little bit with them, that you're okay with doing that. Just 20 seconds at least. That can do, it's according to them, that can do as much to help your body understand it's escaped a threat as jogging a couple of miles. So that sells me on that. I'm an efficient person, so that feels like a better use of time. Number 6 is a good cry. Crying, it's difficult, I think, especially for the men out there and in our lives. There's not as much practice, I think, with crying, but a good cry, it can absolutely, like the physical experience itself of the release can be very helpful to the stress cycle. And no, it won't overcome or like solve a problem or overcome or eliminate a stressor, but it does allow you to complete the cycle a little bit more, to release some of the emotion that comes from the stress. And number 7 is creative self-expression. So creativity, some of us you might hear that and be like, I can't create things. Like I just don't have that in me. I don't know how to draw or do the art thing. It's just not part of, like, maybe you're more, analytically brained. And I can relate to that. But, with this one, it's not about like performance or being performative. It's about taking whatever's inside of you and putting it outside of you. And so that could be literally anything. Like they came up with examples like, painting, yarn work, sketching, engineering some process, dancing, photography, organize your closets. Like that's what I've been doing, which doesn't take much creativity, but there is something about it that feels like I'm doing and I'm thinking creatively in some ways. Knit something, use your imagination. That's another piece. Like if you feel like, okay, I'm not doing any of those like artsy crafty things, they talked about how like you can just imagine, like using your imagination as a process in the brain actually kind of creates the same like neurobiological reactions that they really are kind of going for with this. So just imagining your way through a story or a movie that you've seen, the plot of a movie, like thinking through what that is, or your favorite book, or anything, literally anything. Like you just use your imagination, like go back to childhood and think like, if I was making up a story right now, what would it be? It could be anything. So that, again, brain process does help with the stress cycle. So, the next piece here is, how do you know you've completed the cycle? Well, they say that your body will tell you. And right now, we can't control a lot of the stressors that we have. It's just impossible. So the big takeaway too for them too is like, don't worry if you're not sure that you can recognize when you've completed the stress cycle, when you've gone through the tunnel that you need to. We've all likely got a lot of accumulated stress cycles initiated. So all these little like whirring stress spinning their engine. So it's going to take a while to like get through. Think of it as a backlog, like getting through all that backlog stuff. Hopefully, at the time of this recording, we've all taken a little break around the holidays where we've done some of these things, where we've done some of these things safely, like maybe move a little more than we normally do, breathing and meditating and praying, that social interaction from a distance, creating self-expression. Hopefully, we are already kind of all kickstarting some of those backlogs that we need to get through with the stress cycle. Because incremental little progress is still massive progress towards peace. So, you might have a lot to get through, but think about just like taking a big stack of papers. You take one paper off at a time, and that's how this works, going through those 7 different things. So, takeaways. This is strange, but stress is not bad for you. It really isn't. It's part of the life that we all live, right? So, it's the problem really is, I think, that the strategies that deal with the stressors have almost no relationship to the strategies that deal with the physiological reactions to those stressors. So the 7 things they go through, those do literally point to this is how physiologically you can help yourself get through stress. So stress isn't bad for you. Being stuck in this stress cycle is bad for you. Not moving through it and through those little cycles that come up or in the big cycles that come up, that's what leads to burnout. That's what leads to the stuckness. And also the big takeaway here is to be well is to not live in a perpetual like safety and calm paradise. That is not wellness. It's not a state that you're like a destination you get to and then you're like, okay, I'm well. It's actually, more of a process. It's about fluidity, moving from a state of calm to a state of adversity or risk or adventure, and then moving back again, and the excitement that comes from like that movement. So, it's not a state of being. It's a state of action, is the way they describe it. There's not gold at the end of the rainbow. It's the rainbow that is the gold. So that is basically the overview of the stress cycle and the book that I recommended. So I did want to tell you a little bit more about Just Breathe. Just Breathe that I've mentioned multiple times in staff meetings, I think now, is a virtual resource hub. That's basically what it is. It's an online space for all the resources, all the videos, all the webinars. That's just a one-stop shop. So it's basically, my approach to stress management is emphasizing self-care, mindfulness, and a positive mindset. That's what all the evidence tells us that we should kind of be looking at. And so that's sort of what we've adapted in ways, hopefully creatively, that can help us figure out how to get through all this together. And so the program features, which I know you kind of have been told about, are the micro content, so the mini videos that we'll be sharing with you on various topics, on-demand content, which is here we are in this first moment together, on-demand content. Hopefully you've lasted this far. There's also an interactive space that we call the break room. And so that hopefully will get off the ground a little bit more soon, where you guys can log in, be part of the site, interact with each other, honestly, just as if you'd be interacting or chit-chatting with each other, like when we have all staff meetings and you're in the chat room. But this is just more of a space where you can connect with your coworkers and talk through like what's been going on and how you're coping with things, or updates on your family. So it's really just a place to connect, and that's again called the break room. And finally, the resource and recommendation library. So that's where each Monday I'll share with all of you a recommendation that I have found to be helpful with managing stress or managing just COVID-19 updates and how to kind of get through the toil and tribulations of this whole process this whole year. The micro content that I mentioned, the first feature, it's those minis. They kind of will fall into three categories, and you'll notice. So you'll see the first one here is Murray moments, and Murray moments are going to be focused mostly on self-care and how you can care for yourself, with a little clip of some kind of my sweet, adorable, large, oversized golden retriever taking care of himself, because that is his goal in life. That is his major focus and existential like meaning and purpose. So he will show us along the way how he takes care of himself, and how we can do that too. The lotus flower represents the mindfulness minis. So those are going to be mini videos that kind of talk us through mindfulness, and it could be like short little like momentary little meditations or mindfulness practices. And I use a lot of information in those from the book 5 Good Minutes, and the other book is companion book 5 Good Minutes at Work. And then this person with the brain in the cloud, that's going to be the more like cognitive mindset minis, where we talk more through a complaining thought and how to reframe that thought. So kind of really looking through how we can talk about the stressors in our lives and then like sort of see them in a different way. So please check us out. Sign up to be in the break room. There is the website, and you'll see the little brain with the little dots around it. That's kind of our little go-to logo. We are super excited about being the hub and being the place that you guys can connect and understand stress a little bit better. And let's be honest, you guys really deserve it. You really do. You deserve taking the time to take care of yourself. And if that means also taking care of the people in your life that you love, that's also a big part of it. So stay tuned. Stay tuned for all the things that are coming, and we will see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to this on demand first time webinar. Take care.